It's sweet. It's seductive. Is it deadly?
I think that sugar is a main contributing factor.
The more I learn about it, the more it scares me.
Strategies that I thought the tobacco companies made up back in the 50s, actually some of those the sugar people had done even before that.
On average, in this country, 26 teaspoons of sugar per person per day. That's 40 kilos a year, the equivalent of 20 bags. It's what sweetens the products and spikes the profits of some of the most powerful and familiar companies in the world. The food industry is one of the biggest manufacturers in North America, nearly $1 trillion in sales every year. And it couldn't do it without sugar.
Brain lights up with sugar just like it does with cocaine or heroin. You're going to become an addict.
Is this the result? There's no question, as our consumption of sugars has grown, so have our bodies. Canada doesn't keep good statistics, so we've used American ones. And those stats raise the troubling question, are we changing our evolutionary shape? Here's the line showing our sugar consumption for the last 50 years. Here's the number of people who've become overweight and obese. Now, look at this line. It's for cases of type 2 diabetes. And this one, diseases of the heart. Back in the 80s and 90s, we used to blame a lot of those problems on dietary fat. But then we started taking fat out of our foods. Did the incidence of disease go down? No. So that got a lot of doctors and nutritionists asking why. The answer, according to an increasingly vocal group, is sugar.
Which was worse, the sugar or the fat? The sugar 1,000 times over. The fact is, our food supply has been altered and adulterated under our very noses and in plain sight over the past 30 years.
The fat's going down, the sugar's going up, and we're all getting sick.
You use words. You use poison. You use toxic.
Certainly I use those words, and I mean them. This is not hyperbole. This is the real deal. Everyone thinks that the bad effects of sugar are because sugar has empty calories. What I'm saying is, no, actually, there are lots of things that do have empty calories that are not necessarily poisons.
Poisonous, he says, because of what too much sugar does in our body. So let's take a look at that. Sugar is made up of two molecules, one called glucose, here in blue, the other fructose, in red. When they separate in our gut, the glucose circulates throughout our body, feeding our muscles and our brain. But the fructose goes right to our liver, and it's in the liver where all kinds of problems begin.
When you metabolize fructose in excess, your liver has no choice but to turn that energy into liver fat. And that liver fat then causes all of the downstream metabolic diseases.
We'll tell you more about those diseases in a moment. But first, let's talk about your brain. Too much fructose, says Lustig, shuts down the part of your brain that tells you when you're full.
It doesn't get registered by the brain as you're having eaten. So if you take a kid and prep him with a soft drink and then let him loose at the fast food restaurant, does he eat less or does he eat more? Turns out he eats more.
But the industry sure doesn't make it easy. Look at this breakfast bar. There's sugar near the top of the ingredient list, but there's 4 more sweeteners. Would you know that chemically they're all the same? Then there's this tomato soup. Who knew it would have added sugars too? The only information on the label is 14 grams of sugar in half a cup. Do you know what that means? You shouldn't have to be a dietitian to figure out how much added sugar you're eating, but it helps. Jacqueline Pritchard has added up all the sugar Jonathan eats in a week. It's pretty scary.
This is your week's worth of sugar intake then. So this is equal to 245 teaspoons of sugar.
That's a lot of sugar.
Graphics drove home the point. Maps showing obesity rates rising and spreading across the country like a rash.
What are the health implications of all this? Studies show that obese individuals are at a higher risk of developing chronic diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, and cancer.
Topping the list of contributing factors, the ubiquity of inexpensive, good-tasting, supersized, energy-dense foods. In other words, the very foods the CEOs were in charge of selling.
If your kids drink 1 bottle of soda a day, they're eating the equivalent of 50 pounds of sugar a year. The equivalent of 50 pounds of sugar from just 1 soda.
Kristen Cousins is determined to change that. As a community care dentist in Colorado, she'd always been interested in sugar. But it wasn't until she unearthed a stash of documents from a sugar company that had gone out of business that she got a peek into a very secretive world.
The first folder that I pulled out opened up to a memo, the blue letterhead of the Sugar Association, and it had the word confidential underneath the letterhead. And I just looked at that and oh my God, you know, what have I found?
What she'd found was a directive from the 70s, a memo to industry executives about a newly published scientific white paper, a paper that concluded sugar was not only safe, but important.
It was clear after reading further that the Sugar Association had funded this white paper called Sugar in the Diet of Man, and they were trying to make it appear that it was an independent study.
Among the more than 1,500 pages she uncovered, there were some Canadian ones too. An account of a sugar industry meeting in the 70s in Montreal that included frank talk about heart disease.
The greatest threat to sugar consumption is in the field of nutrition, it says, more particularly in view of comments that have been recently made on the influence of sugar in atherosclerosis. So they were worried.
They were worried as far back as 1971.
What does that say to you?
They've known for a long time.
Strategies that I thought the tobacco companies made up back in the 50s, actually some of those the sugar people had done even before that. We wouldn't have a tobacco epidemic if there wasn't a tobacco industry. We wouldn't have an obesity epidemic if there wasn't an industry that was making a lot of money selling sugar and fat and salt and things like that. And to me, the bottom line is that one of the key disease vectors for non-communicable diseases is big corporations. And I think we're going to have to get these big corporations under control.
Across our portfolio of more than 650 beverages, we now offer over 180 low and no-calorie choices. And most of our
Today, even Coca-Cola, the world's largest sugar user, knows it can't ignore the health debate anymore.
We'd like people to come together on something that concerns all of us: obesity. Coca-Cola and everything.
But the bottom line hasn't changed. If you're getting sick from what you eat, it's your fault.
For people to blame the consumer, to blame the victim in all of this, just as the tobacco companies blame the 12-year-olds they go out and addict, it's just not fair, because people aren't given the information that they need if they're trying to make a good choice.
As with tobacco, at some point it will all come down to lives and to dollars. The reckoning, warns Dr. Lustig, is coming.
The bottom line? There will be no money left by the year 2026 for anything else, because diabetes will have chewed through all of the healthcare dollars. There will be no healthcare in 13 years here in America if we do nothing, and I'm sure Canada is right behind. Bottom line, there will be no money left by the year 2026 for anything else, because diabetes will have chewed through all of the healthcare dollars. There will be no health care in 13 years here in America if we do nothing, and I'm sure Canada is right behind.
The fat's going down, the sugar is going up, and we're all getting sick.